So why did so many people fall for the COVID lies?
I think that the COVID was I won't say the whole thing was a psyop, but there was a psyop accompanying COVID, and they were manipulating. They were using these. We're hardwired in our reptilian core of our brain to, when we're encountered something fearful, to retreat into authorities that are going to protect us. And those buttons were being pushed full time. We were seeing on CNN, the chyrons, every 20 minutes, the new death counts from COVID. The announcers on TV, and by the way, television and radio and newspapers were calling all of that time when we made that big departure and the government really started systematically lying to us, which I think began with the Warren Commission report. And that's why I think we have to go back and really get the answers on that to right the ship. During many of those years, the press was calling government on its lies. But during COVID, they completely stopped. And they were going along with it. And if any of us tried to say, well, wait a minute, in May of 2020, I said, all the government agencies were saying the vaccines are going to prevent transmissions. And I said on my Instagram account, the monkey studies show that they cannot prevent transmission. I didn't say that because I was guessing it or I was, paranoid. I was reading the monkey studies. And the monkey studies, they had given the vaccines to half the monkeys and they had given a placebo to the other half. And they all got COVID, and they all got the same amount of concentrations in their nasal pharynxes. I reported those studies, which were their studies, and I got thrown off of Instagram and called a conspiracy theorist. Oh, you had all the press, and then, as you know, for the next year, they were telling us, you got to get this because it's going to protect grandma, right? You remember when they were telling us that? And they knew it was a lie. And yet all the press went along with it and everybody else. And I think, most Americans were terrified. I'll tell you, you and I have talked in the past about the CIA program called MK Ultra. So the CIA during the 1950s and 1960s developed all of these programs to do social controls, to control individuals and populations. They were trying to develop, for example, Manchurian candidates, an unwilling assassin, using hypnosis, using psychedelic drugs, using torture, using isolation, sensory deprivation, all kinds of methods that they were exploring, not only for manipulating individuals, but manipulating entire populations. How do you get populations to comply? And that group of studies was called MK Naomi, MK Dietrich, MK Ultra. MK stands for mind control. And that's what they were looking for, ways to control people's minds and perceptions. And one of the studies that they funded was a study called the Milgram experiment that took place at Yale. And it was a young associate professor named Stanley Milgram. And he brought about 70 subjects into this experiment. They were from every walk of life. They were black and white, they were students, they were professors, they were business people from the community, every kind of person. And he would sit the subject at a table, and there was a person in the next room who was invisible to them, but who they could hear. They were told that person is strapped to a chair and that he will be given an electric shot when you twist this dial. The subject would be told to twist the dial. Dr. Milgram was there with a white lab coat and all these kind of ornaments that bespoke his authority and his trustworthiness. And he would tell them, turn it up, turn it down, turn it up. And when they turned it up, they could hear the person struggling, screaming, bleeding. And a lot of the subjects would say to Dr. Milgram, I don't want to do it again. And he would tell them, do it anyway. Some of them began crying because they did not want it to twist it up. But 67% of them turned it up to 250 volts where it was marked potentially lethal. And what Dr. Milgram says, and you can look this up, Milgram experiment on Wikipedia. I wouldn't believe Wikipedia, anything you read in Wikipedia, but this thing is actually true. And 67% turned it up to potentially fatal. And what Milgram concluded was that a figure of authority can persuade people, the average person, 67% of people, to override their most closely and fundamentally held values and do things that they know are totally wrong if they're told to do that by authority. And during the COVID, I felt like we were all involved in a giant Milgram experiment where we had a medical doctor.
Which doctor, to be more specific?
Well, we had Dr. Fauci, we all know, and who was telling us to do things that we knew were wrong. And he knew they were wrong. He would say, 1 week, masks don't work, privately and publicly, and 2 weeks later, everybody put them on. Everybody put 2 of them on. And he would say, he said very publicly that if you get an infectious respiratory illness, you do not need a vaccination. And yet he changed his mind. And he said that the best vaccine you can have is to have the disease. There's nothing better. You'll never beat it. But then he said, even if you've had it, you need to get the shot. So they were telling us things that they knew were wrong, but we were doing it because it was an authority telling us. And it also, there's another phenomena that anybody who disagrees with that authority becomes the enemy. They become dangerous. They have to be silenced. Now, the good news is that 33% of the people in the Milgram experiment got up and walked out. And
those are the people in this room right now.
That's the people here right now.
So how do you break this spell? So I just think the most interesting thing about you, if I can say as an outsider watching carefully, is you don't need to do any of this. You've suffered great personal cost, I would say. Certainly in prestige in the world that you've grown up in, and banned from the New York Times, and people call you crazy, but you do it anyway. So no, but it's true. So, and you've taken a lot of heat from people who are close to you, but you do it anyway. Do you think that telling the truth out loud is enough to break the Milgram experiment spell?
Yeah, I think that's how we break it. Enough people have to say, we're not going to do that. And and when you do it, there's a couple of rules about totalitarian systems. One is any power that the government takes away from us, it will never relinquish voluntarily. Rule number 2, any power that the government takes from us, it will ultimately abuse to the greatest extent possible. And number 3, nobody ever complied their way out of totalitarianism. You have to resist.
What powers does the government now have that it didn't have 10 years ago?
Well, they have the power now to revoke all of our constitutional rights. So, and that sounds like hyperbole, but think about it. They figured out, the most important right is freedom of speech. And Hamilton, Madison, and Adams said, we put that in the First Amendment, freedom of expression, because all the other rights are dependent on it. And I've said this to you before, Tucker, that any government that has the power to silence its critics has license for any atrocity. And they knew that. So they put it first, and we saw this dynamic during COVID. As soon as they realized that they could silence us, they could censor doctors, they could censor scientists, they could censor individuals who were injured, they could stop them from talking about their injuries, they could stop parents from talking about their children's injuries. They did all these things to us, and we put up with it, and the press went along with it very shamefully. They became vehicles, stenographers for government propaganda. And we all went along with it. And then what did they do? They immediately went after the other leg of the First Amendment, was freedom of religion. They closed every church in this country for a year. Could you imagine if somebody told you 5 years ago the government's going to close every church in this country? You would say there's no way that that's going to happen, and yet it happened. And they went after the third leg of the First Amendment, which is freedom of assembly, with these social distancing mandates that had no scientific basis. And they went after the Fifth Amendment, which is property rights. They shut down 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation, no public hearing, no environmental impact statement, no notice and comment rulemaking. All of the procedures that guarantee democracy in the regulatory process were abandoned. And you just had one guy, a 50-year bureaucrat who's never been elected to anything, who says, shut down all your businesses, shut down the small businesses, but keep Target and Walmart open. And shut down the churches, but keep the liquor stores open. And keep Facebook and all the people who are cooperating with the government, Facebook, Instagram, Google, and who are censoring speech for us, keep all them open, and shut down all the little guys, and and destroy our communities. We put up with it. Then they got rid of jury trials. The Seventh Amendment says, no American shall be denied the right of a trial before a jury of his peers in case of controversies exceeding $25 in value. Well, there's no pandemic exception. There's no epidemic exception. And yet they said, shut down any corporation, any hospital, any doctor who injured you negligently, recklessly, who was involved in applying a countermeasure cannot be sued, no matter how grievous their behavior, no matter how egregious your injury. And for the first time, so these are all, and then the Fourth Amendment guarantees against illegal searches and seizures, was all completely abandoned with these track and trace surveillance measures that we were all subjected to, where you had to give your medical records before you leave your home. So virtually all of the rights in the Constitution, except the Second Amendment, and probably because there is a Second Amendment. That was the only one they didn't mess with. But all the other ones they got rid of. So if you're asking, what's changed, that's what's changed now. They said to us, oh, we're going to give all those back to you, and they did. So today we have those back. But they've established this very, very dangerous precedent where if there's another emergency and, they can cook up a pandemic anytime they want. That's what gain of function is all about. And anytime if there's the monkeypox pandemic or the dengue pandemic or the Ebola pandemic that are all in the pipeline, when those happen, we again are going to be asked to abandon all of our rights, and most people are going to put up with it. And yeah, not all people.